As a former teacher, I usually don't use a microphone, but they've told me I need a microphone for this. Greetings. It is so great to see all of you. I'm Kathy Hicks, and I'm the president of AHS. And one of my favorite comments during the year is when we reopened our museum in July, somebody came up and said, "You look exactly like you look on Zoom." Yeah, that because it is me on Zoom. So I'm very, very happy to be here in person. And I'm really pleased with this great crowd. And I know you're here tonight because of our opportunity to have this amazing speaker. And I'm going to tell you a little bit about him. But before I do, I want to give you a preview of what's coming next month. So we have two big events next month. First of all, on November 11th, that's a Thursday, back here, we're going to have Charlie Clark, he's a member of our board, but you may know him as Army in Arlington. And he has written a book, a brand new book, and it's going to discuss George Washington Parke Custis. And he is going to be telling that story right here next month. And we hope you can join us for that. Yes, we're so fortunate. He knows when you have a question about Arlington, he's the guy. The next thing is that we have really thought about building community and the importance of community. So on November 13th, that's a Saturday, we are going to launch a new exhibit. And I'm going to read the exact title. It is Stirring Up Memories, Arlington Cookbooks, really focusing in how cookbooks in our area have created community and the importance of them. And there will be goodies. There will be samples from those cookbooks. So that will be at our museum on that Saturday, November 13th. That was when we will launch the exhibit. We'll be up from 1 to 4. And then after that, it's going to stay up through the new year. So hopefully you'll be able to get by, but goodies are on the 13th. So come if you're able on that day. So we're glad to have you here tonight. And I want to tell you a little bit about this great speaker. So Steve Hammond is a retired federal employee. He spent his 40-year career as an earth scientist with the United States Geological Survey, and he now is a scientist emeritus with that agency. He is a 7th generation member of the Syphax family. And as we know, they have been here since the beginning. And he has been invited to speak at other venues. And I want you to know, we're so excited to have him here tonight, but I want you to hear some of the other places. He has participated in many National Park Services programs at the Arlington House, highlighting the Syphax at that estate. He has spoken at the African American Civil War Museum and Historic Decatur House in Washington, D.C. He has contributed to exhibits that have been at Mount Vernon and the Smithsonian National Museum of African American History and Culture. He has been interviewed by numerous organizations, including NPR, C-SPAN, and the Civil War Times. Most recently, you might have seen him on a feature story in CBS's This Morning, talking about the reopening of the Arlington House after its 3-year closure for restoration. He's a member of the Afro-American Historical and Genealogical Society, and he serves as the treasurer for the James Dent Walker chapter in the District of Columbia. He also is a trustee for the Arlington House Foundation and a trustee emeritus for his alma mater, Whitman College. So we are so fortunate to have him speak to us because he has had a lot of events that he has been participating in. His goals really mesh with Arlington Historical Society. He wants to educate and inspire others to research and document their own family history. We are honored to welcome the speaker tonight. Thank you so much for coming.
Well, good evening. It's a pleasure to be here. It's nice to see so many faces. It's kind of nice to get back together face to face, isn't it? Even though we have our masks on and we're doing what we're supposed to be doing, you know, it's nice to be back together again. So thank you for taking the time out of your evening this evening to spend it here with us and to hear a little bit about our family, the Syphaxes. I'd like to start by just asking the question, how many people have heard of the Syphaxes? Yeah, okay. I probably should have asked the question, how many people haven't heard of the Syphaxes in terms of, we've got a couple of people there. So this is going to be a talk that will kind of, for those that you'll hear some of the, the history that we know about. And then we're going to stretch that a little bit to talk about a couple of people who are, local here. So let's see what we can do here as far as. So I want to start, I've been starting my talks recently by making a statement about the indigenous lands that we're on. And so I'd like to read this statement. Many of my ancestors lived, worked, and died on land shown in this slide that we know today as the United States. In Virginia and Maryland, my ancestors lived on the traditional territory and homelands of the Powhatan Nation. I acknowledge and honor the original inhabitants of these lands and their vibrancy and their connection to the land. I support the resilience and strength that all indigenous people have shown worldwide. So start out with a couple of acknowledgements for my ancestors, folks that really impacted me as I was learning about our family. The person there on top is a first cousin, Camellia Estrelda Gray. And she is the one that got me started. Back when I was about 14 or 15 years old, she began to tell me about my family history. She said, did you know you were connected to the first president of the United States? And at 14, I said, get out of here, there's no way. But that set me on a path to learn more about my family. And one of the things that she instilled in me is that she placed a responsibility on me to learn about the family and to share our story. So this tonight is another way for me to continue to do that. The second person here is Evelyn Syphax, whose sons are both here. Doug and Craig are both in the audience. I'm glad to see them. And Evelyn had an impact on me as I had opportunities to come to the DC area. She helped me to understand more about the Syphaxes and many of the people in this area. And she has a history of all of her own. I'm not going to go into Evelyn tonight. We could talk about Evelyn for a couple of hours in terms of all that she's done for this community, but we'll do that another time. And the third person I want to mention is Vincent Syphax, who just turned 99 back just a few weeks ago. And he lives out in Sacramento, and he is a lover of Syphax history, and he has helped me to understand and helped me to love that as well. So real quickly, the topics for our conversation today, I'm going to tell you a little bit about what I'm calling the Syphax Scenic Byway, something that I have coined just because I like it. And so we're going to talk about that. We're going to talk about two lifelong Arlington residents, William T. Syphax and Julian Syphax, and they are the uncles of Doug and Craig. We're going to talk a little bit about the reopening of Arlington House. Many of you know this has been closed. Has anybody been to Arlington House since it's reopened? So a few hands have gone up. Very good. So we'll talk a little bit about that. And then I'll close by talking a little bit about why I believe that these narratives are important. And you'll hear this theme as we talk about this evening. So I'm a pathfinder. And so why do I research my ancestors and share their stories? Because I'm seeking the truth. I'm interested in trying to separate the fact from the folklore, from the fiction, and all those things that we hear, we read, and try to pull those pieces together. I want to honor and remember my ancestors for all the work they did and for putting me on their shoulders so that I could be here to talk with you today. I'm working to expand my knowledge. As an earth scientist, I really wasn't into genealogy until I was a teenager. And so it's been a great way for me to expand my knowledge in the history of our country and our community. I want to share the narrative, which is what we're all about here tonight, to raise awareness of history that's been buried, twisted, and overlooked. And so my goal here is to share this story to whoever will listen to me as I speak. I want to educate and inspire you to do it yourself. We all have stories like this. Syphaxes have some unique aspects of their history, but all of us have unique aspects of our family history. And I encourage you to seek those things out and rediscover the things that your family has been involved with. And I want to create room for conversation. Something that we've been working on heavily for the last few months is really trying to create room for conversations that are uncomfortable at times, but are oh so important for our country as we work to move ahead. So what I had hoped to bring tonight on those two open easels over there was this poster, and I forgot it at home. So I apologize for that, because it's pretty cool. I mean, it's a 14-foot poster, and you know, there's a lot of things on there, but I want you to meet the Syphax family. This gives you a little bit of context of what we're going to be talking about tonight. That blue swath in the middle are the Syphaxes, who are descendants of Martha. Their ancestors were Charles and Maria Syphax, and they were enslaved by George Washington Parke Custis. Over on your left is Nancy Syphax, and that's my branch of the tree. And you can see the star marks where I exist. I'm way out there. I'm cousin Steve, you know. And the two stars over on the right are William T. Syphax and Julian, that we're going to be talking about tonight. So they were descendants of Ennis Syphax, who were direct descendants of Maria and Charles. And then way over to the right are other sisters of Nancy and Charles. And I've got to tell you, I'm just so excited. Just this week, I received a phone call from someone in Georgetown who said that they had found the death record, the burial record for Eliza Syphax. So we now have information that she passed in 1868, and that she's likely buried in the Mount Zion Cemetery in Georgetown. So that is a really exciting piece of information for me. So if we look at this a little bit closer, I want to kind of drill into this just so you can see how I'm attached to these folks. So you can see I'm circled down there in the bottom left, and we can follow this up. As you can see the 7 generations that preceded me. And then I have stars over on Charles and Maria, and then down there on the bottom right, you can see Ennis Syphax, which is where we're going to kind of talk a little bit about today. So here is the 13-mile scenic byway. And the reason I like to talk about this is because there are Syphaxes at every one of these sites. It's really very interesting in terms of thinking about where the Syphaxes have lived, been enslaved, done things for this country and for the community. It ranges all the way from George Washington's Mount Vernon down there on the south to Syphax Elementary School in Washington, D.C. How many of you are familiar with Syphax Elementary School? So if you have questions about that afterwards, I'll be happy to tell you about it. So you can see there are a number of things here. So if you're ever looking for a Saturday or Sunday where you want to take a drive, you could hit all of these places and learn something new about at all of them. So all of these sites, or many of these sites, actually have put information up on their websites. And so this is just to give you a small sense of how the Syphax narrative is being told. Things that I've been working on for several years to try to make sure that their story is told in a way that people say, wow, that's some history that we need to learn more about. So the one poster that I did bring is over there. This is the Carter Lee Syphax Custis family tree that includes the Syphaxes down there on the lower right-hand side and the Custises and the Lees over on the left-hand side. And this is a poster that the National Park Service has put together to try to help tell more of the story of the folks that lived there at Arlington, but also more of about the descendants of George Washington Parke Custis. So maps tell you so much in terms of where people lived and how things kind of laid out. And so this is a map that I put together, basically shows a period of about 1820 to about 1890 or so. And the important things to take away from this are, you can see the large plantation footprint, about 1,100, just short of 1,200 acres that belonged to George Washington Parke Custis that he inherited. But down there on the lower left-hand corner is this triangular piece of property that was actually gifted to Maria Syphax by her father, George Washington Parke Custis. And you can see that that is adjacent to what was known as the Freedmen's Village. So after the Civil War started, they put together this Freedmen's Village, and thousands of people basically passed through that site over a period of time. So one of the things that I have really been trying to chirp about and talk about is the fact that Mariah and Charles and 6 other people who lived and were buried on their property were actually exhumed and reinterred over in Maryland. So here we are, I mean, a few hundred feet from Arlington National Cemetery, where we honor our Civil War, our dead, our heroes in the military. George Washington Parke Custis is buried probably 300 yards from the house. And Mariah and her family have been uprooted and taken out of the state to be placed in Maryland. That to me is a problem. I want to highlight the fact that Mariah, 1, was George Washington Parke's daughter, and 2, they had an impact on what happened on that property. And I think there ought to be more done that talks about how that has occurred. So I've been coining the term Syphax Corner. You think about that triangular piece of property. I think of Syphax Corner as that northernmost point of that property that really gives us an opportunity to look at how the Park Service, how the Arlington National Cemetery, and how Fort Myer all have been, created and intersect at that point, and the lives that basically pass through that space. So the other thing that I want to share, I'm also doing a couple of DNA studies. So I wasn't going to let you get away without me telling you that I'm actually working on a Syphax DNA study. And this poster, which is the one that I was going to bring over here, basically, can you see the blue and pink dots? So all of those people are Syphaxes who have taken DNA tests. So we're close to 50 people who have participated. It's really pretty fascinating. You might say, so what is it that you're trying to do? Well, there's a number of things that we can do. One of which is a goal of mine is to try to actually show the genetic connection with George Washington Parke Custis. It would be neat to be able to do that, but it takes more people to participate in that. You've got to have people over on the other side of the family that we can compare DNA with to be able to think about that. I hope one day that we'll be able to do that. The other thing that we can do with autosomal DNA is we can actually find other cousins. So there are people out there that don't know that they're a part of this family, but they've actually taken a DNA test. And so there's an opportunity for them to learn more about their family history as well. So the other big thing that I want to show you with these tests is a mitochondrial DNA test. There's Y DNA, there's mitochondrial DNA, there's X DNA, and there's autosomal DNA. Well, the mitochondrial DNA test allows you to look back in history in terms of how you're connected. And 2 years ago, I was able to locate the one female descendant line, all females of the Syphax family. And as a result of that, I was able to ask them to participate in our study. And they took a mitochondrial DNA test, and look what we found. We are able to learn that their mitochondrial DNA came from Africa. I mean, not something, our family history and our folklore says that Mariah, and her ancestors were from Africa, but we now have a DNA that helps us to see that in fact is the case. It's a great way to start a conversation. So I want to segue now into kind of the deep roots of Syphaxes in Alexandria. And I want to basically highlight the lives of William T. and Julian. And you can see the singing Syphaxes down there on the right. I'm sure Doug and Craig, you've seen this picture many times, but they were a very close, loving family. And from what I understand, that they love to sing. They all sang in church, and they love to do things together. So I want to start by talking about William T. He's done so many things, not unlike Evelyn Syphax. I could spend 2 hours just talking about him. It's really pretty amazing. He was born in Arlington along with the other kids, but the family moved to Ithaca, New York in 1928. And we all know what happened in 1929, right? The Great Depression. And as a result of that, the siblings actually helped their mother to raise money, to eat, and to survive. The oldest, being William T., actually had an opportunity to attend Virginia State College down in Williamsburg. It's now known as Virginia State University. His goal was to obtain his PhD. For a kid who had come from a very difficult time, I think he'd even had been hit by a car when he was a small kid. He recovered from that and he went on to do some amazing things. After he actually graduated from Virginia State College early, and he actually was able to find work at Rutgers University, where he was able to continue his schooling. And then at Rutgers, people were telling him that you have an opportunity to enlist on the one hand, and you could go on and have opportunities to go to Yale and MIT, and the other Blacks in that area were saying that they're pulling your leg. And it turns out that as he had the opportunity to do that, he enlisted in 1942. And it turns out that discrimination and segregation raised its head. The person who was in charge of deciding who got to go to Yale and who got to go to other places interceded and basically sent William T. to Tuskegee. Well, he became one of the first airmen down there. Even though he didn't fly, they were kind of considered the Tuskegee Airmen, but he really began to focus on communications and physics and things that he really loved to do. It was all about what his interests were. He ultimately married Marguerite Reed in 1945, but guided by God, he returned to Arlington after the war. He was a civil servant, worked over here at Arlington Hall for a number of years. In 1953, he started construction business. How many of you are aware of the Syphax construction business? There are a couple. Amazing. He ultimately built 100 homes as a hobby. You know, he started this on a whim in terms, somebody was asking him if he would help repair their house. And he did that, and he ultimately built them a new house. And he went on to build houses for other friends and other people who needed houses. But he ultimately got into the apartment building business and built thousands of apartments in this region. With his wife, Marguerite, they developed this construction business. And by 1973-74, they were seen by Black Enterprise Magazine as one of the top 100 companies in the country in terms of what they were able to do in terms of revenue. Really pretty powerful. That's $7 million back then is about $43 million today. So he actually earned his master's degree at GW. He's doing all this work. He's got these companies going, and he went on to get his PhD at Civic Western University in behavior and philosophy. And the reason that he did that was because he wanted to learn how to document the processes that he was developing in terms of how he was helping others. How could he impact society, and how could he bottle this in a way that other people could latch onto? He mentored Black kids at Hoffman Boston High School, paid expenses for more than 128 students, and never asked for a cent. All he asked was for them to pay it forward. Pretty powerful, wouldn't you say? As a member of the Arlingtonians for a Better County, he was appointed to the Arlington County Building and Code Board of Appeals, and he was later appointed to the State Highway Commission, where he served for a number of years. And in 1965, he was named the Virginia Real Estate Brokers Association Builder of the Year, and in 75 was named the Outstanding Minority Businessman of the Year. Pretty powerful resume for a man who came from almost nothing, and he gave back to the community at every chance he had. So I want to segue now to Julian, and to do that, I want to give you a little more background about the Arlington space there. So here's another map of the Arlington space, the plantation. But what I've done here is I've taken a Google map and I've overlaid how the cemetery has grown over the last 150 years. And you can see the colors. Can you see the colors on that and the dates? You can kind of see how the cemetery has grown and morphed. And over on the right, you can see 1966, the expansion. That actually was the Department of Agriculture. They had a large farm there for a number of years until that was taken down, and then the cemetery expanded into that space. You can see the Syphax property down there tucked in the corner. And then over on the left-hand side, you can see how Fort Myer began to grow. It started up there in the upper left. And then as they needed more space, they began to take on property down the west side of the Custis property. And ultimately they took over the space there that was belonged to the Syphaxes. But you can see here that how close they were to the Pentagon. Very, very close in proximity. So here's a picture that was taken in 1930. I want to thank my friend over at the Arlington Historian's Office, Tim Frank, who actually found this and shared it with me. But it's an aerial photo. It's the only one that I've seen that actually shows the property around 1930. And so I've overlaid the lines. The blue line is the triangle for the Syphax property. The orange or yellow line there is kind of where the Freedmen's Village was located. You can see there in the middle, there's kind of a pond. If you've seen pictures of the maps, the historical maps, you can see there's a depression. Well, there, the old depression is still there. And then over there on the far distance, you can actually see the experimental farm the Department of Agriculture had. And over in the way upper top right-hand side, you can actually see the Long Bridge. Can you see that up there? It's a pretty amazing picture, isn't it? It's amazing. So one of the things that I decided to do is I wanted to try to understand how that property changed hands over time. And so I've read things from the Arlington Historical Society and other documents down at the state library, and I was able to put together this kind of land use summary. And it shows how the property was split up amongst Mariah Syphax's children as a part of her will. And there in the center, can you see, it's kind of hard to see here. There's right here. We believe that that's about where the family cemetery was located. But the goal here was to kind of show how the use of the property changed over time. The other thing that I wanted to share, and many of you probably know this, is, anybody know what this white line is? It's the cable car route. And there is actually right in here was actually a place called Syphax Station. They actually had a stop that was right there in the Syphax compound. Really pretty amazing. And then you can see over time how things have morphed, and ultimately it's Fort Myer, and there's a swimming pool on that site. So Julian, so get back to talk about Julian for just a second. There's another picture of all the kids. Julian recalls, take a look at that statement there in the middle. He recalls as a kid going down after they were already in New York, driving down to visit their grandmother and actually climbing on the wall between his family cemetery or the Syphax compound and the cemetery. And when he told me that a couple of years ago, I just really brought tears to my eyes to think about him and how he remembered that space and how he spent time down there with his grandmother, and now what it looks like today. Today, it's the southern entrance to Fort Myer. So remember I was talking about Syphax Corner? So my goal is at some point to try to have this point right there identified as Syphax Corner, so that there would be, when opportunities, when visitors are going to Arlington, there's something to said about that space is where it marks where this property was once the daughter of George Washington Parke Custis and was also adjacent to this Freedmen's Village where all these people spent time. So watch this space. Maybe one day I will get there. So I want to share this with you. I'm not sure if this will have sound. We'll see.
The honor flight that brought 3 World War II veterans for a visit to SFO was intended to pay a debt.
Everybody thinks they got a big parade when they came home. A lot of them came home, they went to work, they never got anything.
The program treats veterans to VIP trips to places of military honor, and they have to hurry with World War II vets because, frankly, there aren't many left.
We're fading away, and we realize that we're now the last of the Mohicans.
Sid Levitt earned a Purple Heart and served in the Battle of the Bulge. Julian Syphax was a ship's cook in the Pacific Theater. And then there's Carl Muscarelli. You may not know the name, but you have no doubt seen his picture. He's the guy who sold the famous kiss from a nurse in Times Square on VJ Day, 1945.
I had a few years.
long enough. And I learned later on, Alfred Eisenstadt, who was the photographer, the life magazine, was following me around.
Others have claimed to be the kisser amidst the chaos of the wild celebration, but Carl says his mother recognized him immediately from a birthmark on his right hand. From the airport, the group traveled to visit the Jeremiah O'Brien Liberty ship at Pier 45. That's because the debt being repaid was really to Julian, who shipped out for Okinawa from this very spot.
After 70-some years, to come back and renew all the old things that you've been thinking about. Now you see it firsthand, back again.
You see, as one of only 3 black sailors on his ship, Julian was subjected to racism and daily humiliation from his fellow sailors, even though he was just trying to serve his country. But through it all, he managed to maintain his dignity and love of country.
Country first. That's the way it goes. Country first.
But today, this country put him first, something he's been owed for a long time. In San Francisco, John Ramos, KPIX5.
Amazing. Amazing what he had to endure as a result of being on that ship. So he remembers when he got the urge to volunteer. He was actually sitting in a movie theater, probably not unlike something like we're in right now, and learned of the bombing at Pearl Harbor. And that's when he knew he needed to volunteer. At the time, he didn't realize that it was a segregated service. So, I mean, everybody's equal. I'm going to do my thing and support the country. He was assigned as a cook, went to Baker's School, 300 men total, 3 black men were a part of this group. But his aptitude test said that he was really capable of doing other things, but that didn't register. He served as a cook on board the ARD-21, which was a ship that amazed, as I looked up this ARD-21, it actually is this huge vessel that actually is a floating dry dock, that vessels that have had damage or whatever basically show up and all the sailors go to work on it. He married his wife, Elizabeth Hicks, in 1952, and his second wife, Belle, in 1972. But there's more to this story that I want to read to you. My cousin Don and I actually conducted an oral interview with cousin Julian in June of 2019. And you may see up there at the top, he passed away just a couple of months ago in the summer. And we really miss him. But I want to read this to you in terms of one of the, how he talked about his experience, one of his experiences that really impacted him as an American, as a sailor, as a black man in our country. As a Negro in the segregated Navy, Julian was relegated to the aft section of the ship during their free time. One night while off duty, 5 white sailors approached Julian, who happened to be alone at the time. Julian recalled that he asked, "What is it that you all want?" The other sailors told Julian that they were going to whip him. As the threat became real, Julian feared for his safety. He described to me how he called out for help to anyone within earshot, including calling out the captain's name. The 5 sailors ultimately backed off from their threat. Julian shared with me how frightened he was as a result of that experience. But sadly, the trauma did not end there for Julian. In the days following the incident at the aft of the ship, Julian was ordered to get into his dress whites to meet the captain. Having heard that Julian called out the name for the captain for help apparently was against some naval regulation. As a result, Julian was given 5 nights on board the brig military prison for calling out the captain's name. Julian shared with me that he'd never been so scared in his life. I get choked up reading this. He was never so scared in his life over those 5 days. He told me the rats in the cell were as big as cats. As you saw in the video, In the video clip, Julian loved his country and would have done just about anything for it. It was only at the end of his life that he was able to talk about the traumatic experience that occurred as a result of segregation, discrimination, humiliation, and abuse in the military during the period of his service. Julian is an American hero for enduring that experience as he was faithfully and voluntarily serving our country. So after he got out of the service, he actually came back to Arlington. And by 1951, he was actually one of the first 3 African-American paid firefighters for Arlington at the Halls Hill station. Later, there were others that were hired. In fact, I didn't realize this until reading it just a few days ago, that Doug and Craig's father, Archie, also was hired as a firefighter. I don't know how long he spent, that we can talk about that afterwards. I'd be curious. He worked there for 21 years? There you go. So pretty amazing. So again, when you think about just this small family and the impact that they've had and the things that they've gone through with the country and how they've given back to our country, I think it's really pretty amazing. And if you would, I'd like to give all of these folks a round of applause. Thank you. So I'm going to turn now a little bit lighter to talk about the Arlington House and what's going on there. I'm sure you're aware that the house has been closed since 2018 for rehabilitation. David Rubenstein had given $12.35 million donation to the National Park Foundation for the rehabilitation. We're really excited that it's taken 3 years, but we're excited that it's reopened to the public. And on June 5th, the descendants, family members actually had an opportunity to walk in that space before it opened to the public, which we're really appreciative of the National Park Service for offering that opportunity. And one of the things that we're hoping for as a result of this is to provide a more inclusive narrative of the space so that visitors who come to see that space, which is currently known as the Arlington House, the Robert E. Lee Memorial, recognize it for more than that. We don't want to take away from Robert E. Lee and the things that he has done, but at the same time, there are aspects of this house that have lost the history of those that lived there. And one of our goals is to change that by changing the name. The descendants of the Arlington House are speaking out. We've actually, with the help of our friend Susan Glisson down here in the front, has helped to facilitate conversations for descendant family members since April. With the help of the Park Service, who's basically allowed Susan to be a part of this process, we've gotten to know each other and we're doing things together, and we've decided that we want to put our collective voices together. We feel that it's time for a change. We met with Don Beyer in August, at the end of August, and he is agreed to reintroduce name change legislation. He did this last December, I believe it was, and it died in Congress there. But he's about ready to reintroduce this bill in the next week or two. And we are enthused about that. And we are going to raise our voices as a result of that. And so we hope that with this change, we can help to elevate all of those voices that are a part of the space. So as we tie up this honoring veterans and things that are going on, one of the things that I've been working on with my colleague up there, Tamara Moore, we were basically a part of a community of practice at the Park Service. And one of the things that we were talking about over the last, 5 or 6 years, Tamara, is how do we tell the story? What kinds of things can the descendants do? And we basically agreed to have a space for descendants to actually tell stories. And so I was honored to have the opportunity to put together the first exhibit that's going to be displayed there. I'm working on it now, but it's going to be a display that really highlights all of those veterans of the Syphaxes who have served. And we hope that that will be done in the next few months so that the next time you visit, you'll be able to see this space. But we have almost more than 36 Syphaxes who have served in various aspects, some of which have served more than once in different capacities. And that's pretty amazing when you consider the family. And I want to highlight those folks over on the right. You can see Julian over on the far right in his sailor uniform, and the other two men are cousins. You can see Vincent Syphax there in the middle and Milton Dunham there on the left. Those are our last two World War II vets. They continue to live. And I would like to see this exhibit put together to honor them before they pass. So last but not least, I'd like to just go back and talk a little bit more about why is sharing narrative so important. We can go down this list here and talk about why it's important to know your family history and who has come before us. We can tease out the facts from the fiction. We can fill in gaps in our history, in terms of the things that have been overlooked. But we can also challenge and correct the record. Sometimes there are things that are stated that just simply are not true. And we've been living that in this recent several years in terms of trying to figure out fact from fiction. What's true? What do we choose to believe? What do we choose not to believe? But I hope that we can also use this to understand where our society has been so we can make better decisions on where we're going. And I would hope and want to encourage and inspire us to research others so that we can help to tell these stories. So I have just a couple of more examples that I want to share with you in terms of how I'm doing this. One of the things that I'm doing is I basically am looking for how, in this case, William Syphax, who was the patriarch of our family, basically interacted with people around him. And this is a timeline that I put together. He basically lived in Alexandria for a good part of his life. And you can see there on the left, the people who he interacted with. And a couple are kind of well-known people, right? So my goal here is to figure out where in their lives did they intersect with these other lives and try to figure out what kind of stories and things, what impacted their lives, why did they make certain decisions? The other thing is I want to try to challenge and correct the record. What I'm showing you here is a 1939 congressional record statement, as well as a newspaper article that was basically a story about Frank Keith, a representative legislator from Wisconsin, who in order to defund the WPA, the Federal Writers Project after the Depression, basically was saying that the story of Mariah Syphax was false. And that for us to, basically be saying that George Washington Parke Custis was her father was blasphemy. That's a problem for me. The record is clear that it's incorrect. And so this sits in our archive at Congress today. So how do we make sure that the future knows what the real story is? We all have a responsibility to find these spaces and correct them where they exist. And then the last thing I wanted to share with you is create space for hard conversation. And this may be hard for some people here, but my third great grandmother, you maybe remember the poster, Nancy Syphax, was actually owned by John Gadsby. Everybody know what John Gadsby is? John Gadsby Tavern in Alexandria. Well, he also at one time owned the Decatur House in Washington, D.C. And my third great grandmother, Nancy Syphax, was enslaved by John Gadsby. When he passed Nancy on to his wife. And when Providence Gadsby passed, she passed her on to her daughter. And in 1862, prior to the Emancipation Proclamation, Abraham Lincoln signed the Emancipation Compensation Act. How many people are familiar with the Emancipation Compensation Act? What it called for was the freedom of those enslaved in Washington, D.C., nowhere else, Washington, D.C., but it compensated those who owned them. So what you see here is a petition that was put together by Augusta McBlair. It shows the 5 or 6 people there on the left who she owned, who had just been freed by the Emancipation Compensation Act. It lists their value, what their skills were, and why they were important to her, and what the impact was. And you'll see Nancy is listed there. And then over on the right-hand side, these petitions were actually given to a board that actually went through them and decided how much money should be given to the owner. How much money was given to Augusta for Nancy? $87.60. McBlair basically said she was worth more than $800 to her. But that's the least of it. The fact that we have chosen as a country in a condition to basically do reparations. Reparations for whom? And how do we have this conversation as we go forward as a country? We've done it once. We're talking about doing things for other folks. It's unclear to me whether it's a monetary reparation or one that just simply tries to create more equity in this country. And I'm hoping that we can have these kinds of conversations as my work and other people's work in this space continues to unfold. So with that, I will end and take questions. Thank you. Anybody? Yes.
Yeah, excellent talk, Steve. Could you use modern landmarks and explain where the 17 acres is not at? I was in relation to say the Sheraton Hotel.
Right. So I'm going to try to go back there. So the Sheraton Hotel is to the lower left of that. Let's see if I can. So the Sheraton Hotel would be out here someplace. And you know, they're talking about enlarging the cemetery now, and where the Air Force War Memorial is, that is like right about in here. And so there was the Sheraton was here, but there was also the GAR Cemetery, where many people who were at Freedman's Village and who lived on that property that were enslaved were actually buried. And that cemetery was ultimately closed, and people were then reinterred in other locations. So it's a huge piece of property, and a lot of people actually get confused when they see a map. They think that the Syphax property was up here in the north side, but that's not the case. Yes,
Thanks.
Kathy.
It was very informative and emotional. But I did have a question. When they were dwindling away the land, were they providing any compensation?
I have been looking for, I need to answer that question. I'm going to just kind of do a little bit of backstory here a little bit. So the Syphaxes lost their property in 1863 when the property was taken from the Lees as a result of non-payment of taxes. At that particular time, the Syphaxes became squatters. They had no proof that that property belonged to them. Ultimately, their oldest son, William Syphax, who many of you may be aware of, actually went to Congress and worked with people who were in Congress to have that property returned to Mariah. So by 1866, the property is returned to the Syphaxes. They lived there until about 1844. In 1886, Mariah Syphax dies, but the property is passed on to her children. The property begins to change hands a little bit in terms of people selling off portions and things like that. But in 1944, here's where I can't tell who condemned the property. The property was condemned, and it was ultimately purchased by the federal government to enlarge Fort Myer. So in 1844, it was condemned. People were apparently given some compensation and help to move. I don't know what that looks like. I am still looking for that documentation, just so that I have a better sense for what that looks like. But many folks like Craig and others, their families ended up moving just outside of that space And many people still live in that area today, as you probably well know. That answer your question?
Yeah, thank you.
Other questions? Yes, ma'am.
Tell us a little more about the Syphax Education Building and how it came to be and what was the process of the county went through to do that?
Well, the Syphax Education Building is actually named for Craig and Doug's mother, Evelyn Syphax. As a spirited woman who had lots to say, who led the school board, who had a Montessori school and really had an impact on the society, people felt that she deserved to be recognized. And ultimately, they named the Syphax Education Center after
And
her.
when was it named?
Doug, Craig, do you remember the year?
Well, actually, there were two of them. One was in North Arlington, across the street from Washington Way. That was the Evelyn Syphax Academic Center.
Right.
And that was, we had a grand reopening for that one in around 2008.
So the first building around 2007 or 8.
Yeah, and then this more recent one, we had the ribbon cutting and the grand opening 2018.
So for those on the tape, about 2018 is when that education center was opened. So fairly recent, right?
Well, just to clarify, they moved the offices that were in the building by W&L. They moved it to the spot on Washington Boulevard.
Got it.
And moved the whole operation there, and that was the rename.
Thank
It was
you.
still that, but it was officially.
So as a result of moving from the other space into
Right.
this new space, they felt it appropriate to name the space after Evelyn. There you go. Thank you very much. Yes, sir.
How did the family acquire the name Syphax?
That's a great question. I mean, Syphax is great when you're looking for people in the census, you know, and there are not too many Syphaxes, but there are other Syphaxes in this country that are not a part of our family tree. So that's interesting. But as far as the folklore that I have been taught, the patriarch that we think of as the head of our family, William Syphax, born around 1773, was originally had the last name Anderson. And he actually assumed the name Syphax because people felt that he had a regalness about him. That if you look at his history in Arlington, he was a character. He's written about. He lived on the property of the Carlisle House. Familiar where the Carlisle House is? He lived in the supply house in front of that house for a number of years. And when it was sold, the newspaper article basically said the place where William Syphax used to live. So, I mean, he was used as an icon to, in terms of how he was remembered in the city. And so William Syphax took on this name, as far as my folklore says, in terms of being somebody who people looked up to and had an impact on society.
The Syphax name came from over in North African country, Tunisia. King Syphax in the 1500s, he was a lieutenant in Hannibal's army.
It's actually 200 BC,
Okay, thanks.
a couple of years before.
Okay, thanks. And he was a lieutenant in Hannibal's army, and he was a military strategist. And he was the one that told Hannibal, let's bring the elephants and everything around the backside, and we can capture our enemy that way. And so Hannibal took him up on his suggestion, and it became a success. And that's, as far as my research goes, it all started with the Syphax over in Tunisia, two countries, Carthage and Numidia. And he was a strong, foreboding leader. He was a military strategist, and he fell in love very easily.
which was kind of what his downfall was. But as far as our connection to that Syphax, King Syphax, there is no connection that I've been able to make at this point. Other questions, comments, thoughts? Yes, ma'am.
I wonder if I'm the only person in the room that remembers the efforts made by the Black Heritage Museum when Talmadge Williams, Dr. Williams, was alive, to obtain property where the old Navy Annex buildings were. And that I remember attending a press conference when Senator John Warner signed a contract or an agreement with Arlington County to provide that land for the museum.
Is that so?
And it has been dissipated. In the current county office buildings, there is a staircase with a painted mural. That mural was to have gone in that building. And there was an effort a couple of years ago to take it down and just get rid of it, but it's still there. However, the agreement, Senator Warner is now dead. The superintendent for Arlington Cemetery is getting possession of the land that was, as Dr. Williams used to say, and it's clearly documented in many ways, was part of Friedman's Village and is land that in part was the cemetery for individuals from Friedman's Village.
Absolutely.
And is already consecrated land. It really should not be there under the hotel and on those, it just, I can't believe I'm the only person in this room that remembers this and feels terribly disappointed as to what happened and that the county did not live up to its half of the agreement.
I appreciate those comments. I know that Evelyn was, the key figure for putting together the museum in terms of what was going on there. Craig has played a big role in that in recent years. And, the script is still unfolding. We have voices. There are ways to, make our thoughts heard. So not unlike the county rethinking about what its logo is. It took a little while, but it happened, right? So there are opportunities for us to change the trajectory of our country, despite the fact that it seems like an uphill battle. And I'm an optimist in terms of things that we can change, and we just need to stick with it. So I appreciate that. I'd love to talk to you more.
Steve, you said earlier that there was a railroad.
Yeah.
You showed us on here, and you said that there was a Syphax station.
Yep.
Along the route.
Correct.
I would be interested in knowing where would it be located today?
Syphax, it would actually be in Fort Myer.
On the Fort Myer property?
Yes, sir. Yeah. So when you think about that triangle that we have there, let's see if we go back. This might be the best place to show it. Is that I believe that the cable car basically came down here and cut across and then turned out this way down to Arlington or Alexandria. And so it would have been somewhere about in there, Doug.
Okay, thank you.
You bet. Yes, ma'am.
Can you discuss the museum? Where is it? Is it open to the public?
The Alexandria Black History Museum or the Arlington?
Yes.
Well, so the museum at the Arlington House is actually in the back of the house. If you've been, have you been to the Arlington House before?
Yes.
So what they have done is they have repurposed what was the enslaved quarters. If you've been there years ago, you know that this was a place where they actually had a concession. Remember that? A bookstore. Okay, bookstore, concession, they were selling stuff. And so as a result of the refurbishment, they basically converted those spaces into exhibit space. They also have converted the old garden house down the path into exhibit space. That house is kind of dedicated to the history of Robert E. Lee, whereas the enslaved quarters actually talk about those people who we know lived, died, and worked on the Arlington plantation. Now, I don't know if that answers your question or
Is
not.
there a museum in Arlington on Columbia Pike?
Yeah.
And is it open to the public or closed?
Correct.
It's open to the public.
So that's the Arlington Black History Museum you're talking about, correct? Correct.
No, they're looking for permanent space, but they've been co-locating with the Columbia Pike Revitalization Office there on Columbia Pike in there.
Craig, do you want to add anything, Craig Syphax? Okay. So Charlie, can you say that again a little bit louder?
Yeah, so the Black Heritage Museum of Arlington had office space further up Columbia Pike. In recent years, been co-located with the Columbia Pike Revitalization Organization, and they're both looking for more permanent space.
So 2611 South Columbia Pike.
We're open Tuesdays, Thursdays, and Saturdays.
So we're at the top of the hour. If there are any other questions, I'd be happy to take them afterwards, but I really appreciate your time and being here tonight and spending time with us to talk about this important topic.
Good job.
Thank you.
Thank you so much. Very much appreciate you being here, and thank all of you for coming out and our first live after a long Zooming pandemic, and we're so happy to have you and hope you'll join us for future events. Thank you.
Thank you for coming. It took me a minute to figure out that that's what you.
Yeah, I can tell you the what.
And then all of a sudden it's clear.
How are you?
Good job.
Okay.